welcome, Pura Vida. Welcome to this special event where we celebrate the launch of the spring-summer issue of ReVista. Thanks everyone present here. Thank you for the people who are online and to those who will see the recording too. This issue explores the rich culture, the challenges and innovations of Costa Rica. I am Rafael Monge. I'm delighted to be your guide through these discussions. I also had the opportunity to contribute to this issue with an article. It's called Pura Vida, Pura Sustainability, Costa Rica's Path to a Green Future, where just exploring how sustainable practices are shaping our nation's future. To begin, I am pleased to introduce Steve Levitsky, Director of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, who will be delivering the opening remarks for tonight's event. Steve, you want to start us off?
Thanks, Rafael. Opening remarks, I think, is a little overstated, and you already took my Pura Vida line, so I'm gonna. That was pretty much all I had. Welcome to our ReVista launch. Is Costa Rica different? The issue Costa Rica different. Many thanks, first and foremost, to June and to Rafael, to President Alvarado, to Leila, Claudia, and Daniela. For most of us who study Latin America but not Costa Rica, the answer to the question for many years is obvious. Of course, Costa Rica is different, right? Costa Rica is the oldest democracy in Latin America. Democracy is older than the United States. In the mid-20th century, it abolished its army, constructed an impressive welfare state that dramatically reduced poverty and inequality that didn't happen in most of Latin America. In the late 20th century, it moved ambitiously toward a market economy, jumped ahead of its neighbors into tech. In the early 21st century, as we will hear, it became a pioneer in the region in climate regulation and moving towards a green economy. So of course, obvio, Costa Rica is different. But in many ways in recent decades, for reasons I don't fully understand, Costa Rica also has begun to look a lot more like the rest of Latin America. Inequality levels today, after the last 30 years, are very much Latin American levels. They are high by regional standards. Discontent, as all of you know, and we'll talk about some of the reasons for this, public discontent has skyrocketed in recent years. Support for democracy, which for Costa Ricans rightly are so proud, public support for democracy has fallen to very Latin American levels, And so the question of how Costa Rica is changing, in what ways it's changing, in what ways it is actually becoming less different from the rest of the region. I really can't think of a better person to grapple with this question than my second favorite journalist. My wife's a journalist. June Ehrlich. And I unfortunately have got to go to another event. I can't stay for very long, but I'm so pleased that you organized this issue in this event. And it's great. As well, June always sort of packs the house, but it's great to see you do it again. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Stan.
Please come in. Okay, now June Carolyn Ehrlich, she's the editor-in-chief of ReVista, and she will share a few words about the magazine's vision on why this issue focuses on Costa Rica. June, the floor is yours.
Steve stole my fire. Before ReVista used to be a print issue, and we did country issues every year. And now we're getting back to it. And I'm proud to say that Costa Rica is the first country that we're getting back to. I was very familiar with Costa Rica when I was covering Nicaragua as a war correspondent in the late 70s and 80s. And to me, Costa Rica was always very different and also a little bit boring. Sorry. You know, there were no wars, there were no gangs, it's like, pura vida. And so I thought, well, this is very appropriate. I'm going to look at this unarmed democracy. I'm going to look at this place that since when I was really familiar with it, had gone through the transition of seeing itself as a very white country to a multicultural country. But when I started to talk to authors, and I went to Costa Rica for a few weeks in January, I found out what Steve said, which is that there's been a bit of erosion in that is Costa Rica different. But what is really interesting to me as an editor is when I assigned the articles to people, I did not tell them, analyze the problems and then think about solutions. If you read the issue, it looks as if I've done that. Because Costa Ricans are amazing. They have this whole history of the public school education, of democracy, of voting, and they're thinking about solutions. And I did a count of the 32 articles in ReVista, some of which had multiple authors. Only 4 are not Costa Rican. And of those 4, 2 are married to Costa Ricans. Antes de terminar, yo quiero agradecer a los autores en Costa Rica que están presentes con nosotros hoy in Zoom. I'm thanking the authors who are on Zoom with us today. And I really look forward to this panel discussion. There's a, do you want to do the Q&A?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, June. That's what a great interview. Before I introduce to our panelists, I'm just going to tell you about how's the dynamic of this event. We're going to have, I'm going to have 2 sessions of questions for the panelists, and then I will open the floor to you here in the room or online. And after that, we'll have a summary of the event by Carlos Viquez, who is also one of the authors. And later, for those who are here, we'll share some Costa Rican food in the foyer. So please stay until the end. So let's get to know our esteemed speakers who have explored various aspects of Costa Rican life through their articles. Thank you, June, for getting us into this project. It was a great experience to do it. Our speakers will share what drove them to write on their topics and what they discovered. First, I'd like to introduce Carlos Alvarado Quesada. He's a distinguished professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and also former president of Costa Rica. Carlos brings a deep understanding of our nation's unique characteristics and has explored this in his article, Is Costa Rica Different? A Treasure Chest of Discoveries. Today, he will share his insights on what makes Costa Rica stand out at the global stage. We also have Laili Brown Stangeland, a passionate advocate for Afro-Caribbean heritage and the founder of the Stanford Afro Museum. Her article, The Caribbean Spirit, Preserving Our Heritage and Ancestral Rights, dives into the cultural preservation of Afro-Caribbean communities in Costa Rica. Leila's dedications to the cultural heritage is an inspiration, and she will share the importance of maintaining these traditions for future generations. Next, we have Claudia Dobles Camargo. She's a visiting scholar at MIT and a 2023 Lloyd fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. She wrote an article called Artificial Intelligence, The Next Challenge. It discusses the pivotal role of AI, that AI can play in shaping Costa Rica's future. Her expertise in urban development and technology will guide our discussion on integrating AI into national development. And also joining us is Daniela Solis. She's a vibrant undergrad student at Harvard University from Costa Rica. She's studying government. Daniela addresses a pressing issue in her article, Educational Blackout in Costa Rica, the challenges of a national emergency. She will enlighten us on the challenges and potential solutions to educational crises in Costa Rica. Okay. So now that we know each other, let's dive into the questions. Each of you will have around 5 to 7 minutes for this session, then another one, and then we'll do the Q&A. Okay? So please, Carlos, I will ask you the first question. Could you explain to us what inspired you to explore the uniqueness of Costa Rica and what your key findings were?
Thank you, Rafa, and thanks to all the panelists, to Steve, to June for the invitation to write about it. I think that the issue of the magazine is amazing because of the 34. I haven't read it all yet, but I have read some, and I think it's very rich in its content. So I appreciate the opportunity because also it gave me the chance to reflect on this idea. First, this question of being different. I think it's a discussion for many Costa Ricans comes about not when we discuss among ourselves, but when we go abroad or when we discuss to others. And it's something that it's brought up to us and contrasted to ourselves. And now that I'm teaching and that we're living abroad, it comes many, many times. People ask that. And so I started to ask that again to myself. And one of my answers is that even though there are several relevant moments or events, obviously the abolition of the army or the creation of universal healthcare, or let's say national park system and renewable energies. I believe one of my first preliminary conclusions is there is no one single event that can explain the whole thing. So what I did, also trying to address what June said about us being boring, is to find those events that may shed light on that. I don't like the word uniqueness or exceptional, but that difference. And that's what I did on the article. And I tried to go way back, even in history, to find that. So I'll share just some of those. One element that for me, we don't teach in schools that, is that actually what is Costa Rica now and part of Panama was this land of Veragua, that when it was discovered, the Spanish assigned this to the descendants of Colón. So this land was of El Ducado de Veraguas, which was from all the descendants from Colón. And that somehow explains that all the legal fighting around it, explain why it was not necessarily conquest as fast as other parts. There was legal debate until the family of Colón gave back the possession to the crown. And if you look in time, conquest of Mexico, for example, in 1521, and right away afterwards, conquest of Peru, a couple of years afterwards. But the conquest in the case of Costa Rica came about in 1561, which is quite late compared to the rest of it. And by then, there has already been the debate of Sepúlveda and Bartolomé das Casas regarding how the relation should be with the natives or the naturals. So when the conquest really arrives, Costa Rica, there's a different tone to it, let's say. There are other things that have happened before. Other interesting discovery of this chest or of treasures is Juan Vázquez de Coronado, who is known as the conquistador of Costa Rica. He is half brother to Coronado, the one known here in the US that made the quest from Mexico to the north, exploring for the first time by Europeans, the south of the United States. That's why we talk about, for example, in the movie of Indiana Jones, the cross of Coronado. So that Coronado, known in the US, is related to Juan Vasquez de Coronado, that went to eventually to do the conquest of Costa Rica. One thing that they found out, or many historians repeat, is that the nobles, Spanish nobles that reached Costa Rica, were not among the high-ranking nobles. Were more, it was one of the last frontiers to be conquest, and that also had a difference between what happened with the rest of the region. Costa Rica has also had this myth that then, therefore, because of supposedly lesser number of naturals, Costa Rica was a whiter nation. But across history, also historians have found out, and not only historians, but the DNA testing and others, that this is actually the case. And there is lots of reference to when the population of the indigenous Costa Ricans decreased, lots of labor force from slaves from Africa were brought also to Costa Rica. So there are several waves of migration from Africa to be part of Costa Rica. One key thing that I believe shows that difference, and it's written by many historians, is that given that labor force was more scarce and the Spanish that arrived there were not that rich, the Spanish had to do part of the labor work as well. So that started to craft the type of community that we ended up having as a country. Other findings which I believe really start to shape who we became as a nation eventually when we became an independent country following the waves of independence throughout the Americas was that, and in the article I call it heterodox pragmatism. And in the 19th century, there were several decisions that were very eclectic for the time. One was establishing the mandatory education of men and women in schooling in 1865, if I'm not mistaken. So that was kind of avant-garde for the time. Another avant-garde decision was abolishing the death penalty in 1881. And that was the first lady of President/dictator Tomás Guardia pushing for the abolishment of the death penalty because her brother had been killed, assassinated, or fusilado, how you say that? Killed because of political reasons. And she managed to get that. And also, because of some connection with education, it was the third city to have electricity with San Jose became the first city to have electricity. So there were certain conditions that started to propel this. Other finding that I believe is worth studying, and I'll stop there perhaps, obviously, not better, but stop there, was that if you look at the history of the region in Costa Rica, both Central America and the Caribbean, and if you look at the map and the dates of presence of either the Marines or military intervention or conflicts with United Fruit Company, that's another key player of the region, Costa Rica is the one region that did not have presence of the Marines or the military. So that, I believe, is one of the big differences. And it's worth studying because, and that's why I mentioned the Monroe Doctrine in the piece, because when the relation of power goes away from Europe and the US starts to have an hegemonic role, and when you see the intervention of not only money, but power in the region, somehow Costa Rica was not, let's say, either invaded directly or had that kind of presence. And I believe that had a consequence on how we eventually unfolded. And other of the more traditional findings happened in the 1940s with healthcare, with the evolution of the army and the Second Republic. But I believe many of those are some elements that are there. But it's a question you revisit constantly. There's not one answer to explain how we got here, and not one answer to explain how we're going to get out of the several messes we are out now already. But I think many of those are very rich into deepening on those questions and shed light not only about the past, but on our current situation.
Thank you very much. And now I want to ask Lily, you have written passionately about preserving Afro-Caribbean heritage. What drove you to highlight this important aspect of Costa Rican culture?
Thank you so much for the question. I thank everyone who is here today, all of these amazing panelists, which I feel honored to be amongst. This article, more than just about a thought of mine, is of great importance to our entire community, because these are situations that we are currently living. As a member of the Afro-tribal community of Costa Rica, of course, I am very grateful to President Alvarado for, it's one of his decrees that is really the limb that we're hanging on, that is giving our entire community security. And, you know, like they say, well, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And for our community, it has simply become imperative. We are forced to find new ways of achieving justice. You see, I believe that to value inclusion over assimilation, it is imperative to highlight all peoples. Traditionally, a lot of us get left behind, or we get left out of this picture. The African descendant heritage in Costa Rican culture, it is deep rooted in our connection to our land, our territories, which do exist. I mean, we do exist. For me, well, for all of us, growing up on the shores of the Caribbean Sea, it's more than land, it's more than a beautiful view. This is what nourishes our community. This is what feeds us. It's the bush remedies that grow along these shores. It's the coconut walks. That is part of our food. It's part of our medicine. It's part of our livelihood. And this is a very significant part of our spiritual identity, which we feel that is imperative. I mean, this is something that must go on. We all want a better world for our children. And, you know, I believe that honoring different cultural aspects of all peoples is so important to a society of a whole, because regardless of where we come from, we all can identify with that sense of home, of belonging. It's indispensable to humanity. And our cultural preservation is about maintaining our traditions, asserting our rightful place and the recognition within this broader national context. I would say, you know, in general, Costa Rican peoples everywhere, from the east to the west, the north, the south, just as the country is diverse and beautiful, so are its people. And I must say that I feel we are very advanced in many ways. We do have tolerance. And let's say Ticos in general, I do believe that they are well-intentioned. We do face some particular situations on the Caribbean coast as African descendants. Our entire communities, we are being uprooted. And these are very aggressive actions, because the uprootment of a tribal people is culturally devastating to any nation. And in Costa Rica, this displacement, this uprootment is being justified by intolerant laws. For example, the Maritime Zone Law. It's law number 6043, which satisfies the state's hunger for recuperating lands. But these are lands where we have lived for hundreds of years, even before the creation of the Republic. Since the 70s and even a little before, there has been the creation of numerous national parks on top of existing Afro-tribal communities. We have always lived in harmony with nature, and we have always protected it. It is a good cause to create a national park. Of course, we love this, but not by demolishing my home, not by uprooting an entire people. Such a rich, we provide cultural diversity in the country. We have had another situation which we are dealing with, which affects both Afro-tribal communities and our sister indigenous communities, where Afro-tribal territories have been declared as indigenous reservations, where, as I say, even our indigenous sisters and brothers, when this poorly made delineation came about, they stood up and said, wait, no, but that's not where we live. That's not our territory. This is where the Afros have always lived. And we all live in a great harmony, but still, due to poor delineations, now we all have this land insecurity. It's kind of like, putting two peoples against each other, but gratefully, it has not worked so, because we have this great sisterhood and we live just very well in peace. All of these actions violate several key provisions of the ILO's 169 treaty, which is dedicated to protecting the rights of indigenous and tribal peoples. And this emphasizes that need for recognition, for respect, for land rights, and the requirement of this free and prior informed consultation. So for me, writing this article is about creating this awareness. And all we seek is justice. And for us to imagine cultural integrity and environmental stewardship where these are fulfilled, to us, this is one of the meanings of justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Claudia, it's a pleasure to be by your side today. Your article explores AI and its challenges in depth. I wanted to ask you what prompted you to pick this topic and what insights can you share?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to start thanking to the whole team that organized this event. And I really want to say special thanks to June, not only for the love that we share for Costa Rica, but for this splendid event. Thank you so much, June, and to all the people at Dr. Class that I'm sure work very hard to organize this. So regarding the article, I'm just would like to put a little bit of context. I don't have any computer science background. My background is architecture and urban planning. I was actually in charge of coordinating the urban agenda for the National Decarbonization Plan of Costa Rica. I love to hear you, Lily, because I do believe, and sometimes it's very hard to push this idea that a proper understanding of the complexities of cultural, geographical, environmental complexities in territorial planning, it's needed in order to achieve the challenges that we have in our territory. So how did I jump into artificial intelligence? Well, urban planning has a lot to do with data-driven decision-making And there is a lot of digital urbanism happening. But the reality is that what actually created this huge interest in me is that 2 years ago, I'm going to stop there and provide another thing that I think it's way better to give you more context around the event that happened 2 years ago. So the National Decarbonization Plan, when it was foreseen, it was an idea of how Costa Rica, that it's quite a small country, could face a huge challenge, which is the climate change, that was going to affect one of the most important sectors, our productive sectors, meaning agriculture in some. Everybody say. So our agriculture it's a machine of production in rural and coastal areas, and also tourism. And the idea of the National Decarbonization Plan is how can we transform this challenge into an opportunity, understanding Costa Rican tradition and Costa Rican context, that we have thought outside the box before traditionally. And I think part of that tradition has been expressed not only by Steve Levitsky, but also by Carlos in his article, that Costa Rica abolished the army. Costa Rica created a robust healthcare system. Costa Rica devoted and allocated a lot of its national budget to education. So we have done things in the past that were they were extraordinary by their context. So going back to the present and having that as our tradition, we wanted to honor within the National Decarbonization Plan, how can we, thinking outside the box, could change the threat of climate change into an opportunity for Costa Rica? How could we review and revisit our economical social system in order to create and propose a new way of development, of sustainable development for Costa Rica that could face those challenges and that could locate Costa Rica in a leading position in the international debate around climate change. And this point, it's very, very important. How could we put Costa Rica in a leading position in the international arena to decision-making around climate change? So having said that, 2 years ago, I was invited to a huge event that was coordinated between Harvard and MIT. And it was divided into, I don't remember how many sections, but it was the future of government, the future of health, the future of the cities. I was invited to participate in the future of the cities, but since the agenda was so interesting, I decided to make space and stay for the future of government and the future of health. And in that event, 2 years ago, I was already here at Harvard. I was at GSD, understanding the transition that we have been making through physical public spaces to digital public spaces. And that was somehow related to the future of cities. Then I realized that in the main conversation 2 years ago in that event was how artificial intelligence is going to impact health, how it's going possibly to help governance, and how it's going to impact other areas, obviously urban planning, one of them. And it was very clear for me that there was a huge lack of representation of a huge part of geographies in that conversation. And I thought, well, maybe it's just because of the context, because of where we are, maybe there is not many people from Global South, for a lack of a better term. And then I started to think, how can I link this into my quest to understand how digital spaces are going to have an impact in our social behaviors and our social dynamics. And everything that I could find was pretty much focused on a reality and a context that did not apply and could not be implemented for a Latin American reality and for a Central American reality. And then I started to realize that even though we positioned Costa Rica in a place where it has a strong voice in the international arena to talk about climate change, we don't have a voice to face the challenge that artificial intelligence is going to pose to our society. And even though we have done very good things in the past, we are facing very important challenges right now. Costa Rica is it's stuck in a very unproductive debate around populism that doesn't allow us as a society to really have the meaningful conversations that we need to have in order to face those challenges in the future. Even to acknowledge our own complexities, our own diversity, we are not even talking about that. We are not even talking about, and I am very happy to hear what Daniela has to say about education. So how are we going to face this disruption that it's going to have a huge impact on the labor market, that it's going to have a huge impact on the skills that we may need from the future, from the present and future generations? How are we going to upskill and reskill the people in our current markets? And we are not having those conversations. And more than that, Latin America in general seems not to be having these conversations. And in the decision-making places, the places where these algorithms are being developed, the places where this information and this technology is being deployed, you don't have that many voices from Latin America to provide context, to understand if this is going to be beneficial, or if we need to adapt, or if we need to start from scratch. Not to say that a lot of this artificial intelligence is trained on information that does not represent Latin American culture, does not represent Costa Rican culture. I just did an exercise in my article. I requested an artificial intelligence to provide an image, and I asked this artificial intelligence to give me images from Costa Rica. It was, and I'm sorry to say this, it was like sexy anime with a tropical, with a tropical environment, or something that has nothing to do with Costa Rica. So the thing is that there is a lack of information, and the information that our institutions, our governments are collecting, are gathering, we are not transforming that into data-driven decision-making or data governance that could eventually enhance how can we create and how can we achieve opportunities of artificial intelligence for our own context, in our own reality, for our own challenges and necessities. So that's why I jumped into MIT, from Harvard to MIT, to understand how can we translate this into a Latin American context, and how can we really understand the opportunities and face the challenges and try to, as we did with the abolishment of the army, as we did with the healthcare system, as we did once with a very robust education system, how we need to transform and rethink those pillars of our democracy to keep Costa Rica being one of the strongest democracy in the region. So that was the inspiration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, before moving to Daniela, I just want to provide some context for the people online. We have a full room today, so that's why we had to accommodate some people down here. So just to let you know what's happening. Thank you for being here again. Daniela, focusing on educational emergencies, what motivated you to address this issue, and what are the main findings of your research?
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm so grateful, and thank you to June and all the panelists. I am here to change your perspective on Costa Rica and hopefully not alarm you, but actually drive you to take action, whether you're from Costa Rica or whether you're from any other country in Latin America. So when I arrived to Harvard, first of all, I came very alarmed. I was like, I'm going to study political science because there needs to be change in my country. Yeah, it's a paradise. Yes, it's a beautiful country. We all know this, but I firsthand had to witness all the injustice that the youth and the children of my country, and it breaks my heart that nowadays we don't really talk about this. So it is a hidden reality. Costa Rica is not a paradise. It is boring to the point that maybe the governments are not doing enough. There's a lot of corruption there, and I'm not afraid to talk about these issues because I feel like they have to be taught. And the rural areas of Costa Rica and the education system are suffering. You go to places like Guanacaste, Limon, Punta Arenas, and you go to their schools, and they are abandoned. Schools don't have extracurricular activities. So how are students gonna find jobs? How are students gonna be inspired to go to school, to go to university? I mean, here in the US, you see like some of the public education, you get, okay, club of robotics, club of politics, club of debate. All of these things inspire students. And I was thankful enough because my mother put me in private school education, but I was also part of the public school education. And I can tell you that things would have been really different for me if I would have been to public school education because there are no opportunities. But there's a whole sector of inspired young leaders that just want a chance, just want to get hope. But this article that I wrote, I got to interview a lot of the students. I mean, when I take the public transportation, I go back home, I see all the youth and I talk to them, or even my friends that actually went to college, to, you know, public university, still can't find a job. And or I see like a huge percentage, and you can see all the statistics, 27%, 3 times higher than the general unemployment rate in the world. That's how much Costa Rica has an unemployment rate in young students. Not even people students who are not educated, people who actually went to college don't have jobs. And it's because there is a lack, as I said, underfunded education, number one. So the schools are completely abandoned. Number 2, there are no extracurricular activities. Teachers are also, there's a whole controversy back home because teachers were not having it. They were not getting paid. So they were like going on protests. And so there's just a whole, I want to talk about so many things, but that is essentially what's the problem here. So much unemployment because there is a huge gap in the education. And we're not really enforcing the students, or we're not really guiding them towards sort of a future. So they see, okay, crime is going up. So, and then I want to share this with you because this was, I mean, amazing and very alarming. So as I said, 27% of unemployment in youth could explain why 4 out of every 10 homicide victims in Costa Rica are young people aged between 18 and 29. I also wrote a thesis that showed that democracy is in a crisis right now in Costa Rica. Okay, yeah, we were an amazing democracy, but it's very alarming. 40% of abstentionism in a democracy, and all of these people most of them are youth. So as I was just writing my thesis and doing research, I saw that it's because they've lost hope. Like, you know, or politicians come and first of all, they lack that touch with the community, with the people, with the youth. They don't do campaign in rural places anymore. That's something that's just not happening. So we can see that complete abandonment in the rural areas, complete abandonment in the youth. Young people like me, they don't want to vote. They no longer believe in the government. So these are things that Costa Rica is going through. So it's no longer boring. It's actually needing something that's needing a change. And hopefully I can inspire the young people in this room, Costa Rican or whatever you are from, to try and make that change, because I do believe that we're here and we're starting these conversations so they can lead somewhere brighter and they can lead to a positive change, that one day I hope to bring all this knowledge and all these amazing insights that I've gone and gathered from Harvard to go bring them back to my country. But that's all I want to say, that Costa Rica is not the paradise you think of. It's really needing some change, and it needs it now. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Move to a new set of questions. This is about the future outlook of Costa Rica. I would like you to try to make the answers short so we can have time for a Q&A, right? And I was going to start with Claudia now. Claudia, considering your conclusions on AI, what steps should Costa Rica take next to leverage this technology effectively?
I think there are three areas that needs improvement urgently. The first one will be how to create capacity, so capacity building, and it's completely related with rethinking our education system. The second area is infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure in order to create the conditions to take advantage of artificial intelligence. Having said that, also the infrastructure to create capacity. So meaning, just to give an example that Daniela was talking about, yeah, we need to improve even in the infrastructure for our education system. But we also need a different type of infrastructure, information and technology infrastructure, different type of infrastructure really related to what artificial intelligence needs. These also combine that we need data governance and understanding that data right now has a huge value, but we need to understand how we collect the data, how we share the data between institutions, and how we create data analysis about it to translate that into policy making. We don't have that structure in place, even though we need to have decision making based on that information and that data. And very important initiatives have been made. It needs to be structured in a way that it's safe for institutions to share this information, and to not even to the public as open government, but also between institutions in order to have data analysis. So those three areas, which is capacity building, infrastructure, and policy making. Policy making not only around data, but also around what is the regulatory framework that we may need to face these challenges, and try to work in collaboration with the rest of the countries in the region, because we also face, as a region, we also face the challenge that if the regulatory framework in Latin America, the landscape is too fragmented, it's going to be a problem, because there is a lot of information that we need to share in order to create cohesive policies around situations that are not just affecting Costa Rica alone, but is affecting the whole region, such as how can we protect biodiversity? You cannot protect biodiversity if you don't understand it in a regional level. How can we face challenges around migration and provide dignity to migrant individuals? You cannot do that if you don't understand the regional context. So there is a lot of information that we need to share as a region, that if we don't have a framework, a national framework, it's going to be almost impossible to have a regional framework. And we need to collaborate, not to have this super fragmented landscape, and that will limit us, does not allow us to collaborate in the future.
Thank you. I want to go back to Daniela. From your analysis, what strategic measures should Costa Rica implement to tackle the educational challenges you have outlined?
Yeah, I believe it's key that we implement some policies or laws regarding anti-corruption initiatives and measures, especially in the rural governments, because it's very interesting that it's these rural areas that have all the luxury hotels and they pay a lot of taxes, are the ones that are the most abandoned. The streets, the infrastructure, the schools, all of it, and it affects every single student and every single young person that lives in that area. So I think number one is that, which eventually this will help increase funding for the education department. I would say also career guidance programs, implement extracurriculars. So, students get that aid. They don't have to go back home and, do what, I don't know what, actually not having to get a job, but having that opportunity to staying after school and exploring their interests. So that would be I would think the key reforms. Overall, just funding the education system a little more. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Daniela. Now move to Laili. Laili, how do you see the impact of cultural preservation on Costa Rica's broader societal dynamics moving forward?
So before coming here, I did consult with various members of our community because for us, it's very important that our message is shared. I'm not a representative of everyone by far. I'm a member of this community and we consult, we speak, we ponder these questions. And one of our main quotes, even many times at the beginning of our meetings that we start with, is Marcus Garvey's famous quote, "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." The main thing for us, for cultural preservation, is that we must exist. And the way things are going right now, even just writing this, it was so emotional to me because in this day and age, we are still in a place where we need to plead for our existence. The Supreme Court of Costa Rica refers to us in different rulings as the alleged inhabitants of the Southern Caribbean. I mean, this is something which is, it's dehumanizing. It rejects our very existence. And looking at other rulings, you know, the state of Costa Rica has enacted legislation and adopted policies that are manifestly incompatible with the existing national and international legal obligations regarding the rights that are recognized for African descendants. Still, we are a resilient people. After half a millennium of enslavement, of colonialism, we still exist. We are kind people, we are loving, we are welcoming, and we are still seeking to find peaceful resolutions to the different situations that are proposed to us. But there definitely is a great need to implement more efforts in including us. I mean, I think all people, regardless of where you come from, we do have the right to be considered, especially we need to be part of the conversation, or we need to be in the conversation that has to do with legislature that affect us. And, you know, I see moving forward for us the alignment with both the spirit and the letter of the convention of the ILO's 169. This is something that is attainable, it is inclusive, it's respectful, and it already provides the state with the necessary framework for managing these natural and cultural resources in Costa Rica. I think that by promoting inclusivity and diversity, this helps for the cohesion of the national identity. And this recognition can lead to a more harmonious coexistence and a stronger, more unified national character. So despite the fact that the Costa Rica's state institutions are already measuring most of our ancestral homes, our businesses for demolitions. Sorry, it just makes me very emotional. Because my house is one of those. And these are places that have been built by our ancestors. We've been there for centuries. Pardon. There still is hope, but we do need our government. We do need the state to see our humanity. Pardon. our family's home with the help of the Tribal Forum of People of African Descent. We have transformed our homes into Afro museums. This is our form of resistance, because come July, the moratory laws that protect us are up, and we already all have demolition orders. So many of us have taken our savings and made our homes, our businesses even more beautiful. And we are adding this cultural element to it, because if we are to be ripped off or just erased off of the map, this is our resistance. This is what stays, that you did see us. Thank you.
Carlos, given your insights on this discussion, what future directions do you envision for Costa Rica in maintaining its distinctiveness?
Well, it reminds me, the question's a little bit, I think June said, or Stephen, that our trend started to resemble more the trend of inequality, which actually has rooted on numbers, and it's true. My answer why that has happened is, I'll be too plain and then I'll try to deepen in that. I think it's because we got good at capitalism, which drives inequality. So Costa Rica got really good at, especially after the 80s and after the crisis, we got good at connecting with international markets and diversifying our economies, which was somehow good. But it started to have this dynamic of those more included and those less included. So education started to be a driver of inequality, better education rather than worse education, connectivity being more in the center than in the rural areas, same in dynamics of gender dynamics, race dynamics. So all things that a not tame or not harnessed capitalism unleashes started to move forward. And what was previously perhaps the success of having certain institutions to balance those inequalities started to lose somehow its effectiveness on diminishing that inequality. So more than, this is a view, not absolute certainty, but my views will be that more than being the main driver of the conflict inequality, it has to do with, people don't feel inequality. People, its impact has to do with dignity. And that's the cohesion we're starting to lose on dignity. And that, it's not only happening in Costa Rica, it's happening all across. We see it now on polarization, on people being upset and angry because the system is not giving the opportunity. So you see very often listening to this phrase that the hope, that notion of progress in which next generation is going to be better off than the previous one, starts not when a society does not hold that promise, is when there's a problem with dignity and a problem with hope. So I think that's a little bit the trend that we're seeing. Even though that I remain hopeful, because I fully endorse what Marcus Garvey pointed out about history, but that's also valid for tradition, because we do not start, history did not start today or yesterday. And there are robust roots in certain areas, like the rule of law, democracy, education, human rights, peace, caring for the environment. Those are robust roots that actually we need to reach out to that kind of legacy to understand what comes ahead of us. Just to give an example, yesterday one Congress one distinguished congressman said that we perhaps should reinforce the death penalty to fight against crime. You listen in Costa Rica, we listen to that, but also if we look at our history, part of our success is that while Victor Hugo was fighting to abolish the death penalty in France, we already accomplished that. So in other regards, that has happened. That gives me hope. But the task is not easy. Part of the problem is also on the sustainability of those institutions to deliver for people, and that's happening across the global south. 2/3 of the developing world is under a debt stress. That means all the structures to provide are under stress across the developing world. But also we need to really do the work on making sure that those institutions deliver for people, making it work. And one of the problems is that democracy institutions people are not seeing the fruits of what they were made for. People are losing hope. We desperately need to bring hope about by fixing education for sure, by providing on terms of human rights for all the communities. One of the topics regarding why was declared a tribal and the ancestry of the Afro-descendant community, because there are many waves. One wave of migration dates from 1700 when a Danish galleon was sunk in the coast of the Caribbean, and the people that were enslaved went to the Caribbean and started inhabiting the area that we're talking about. So that's where that descent comes from, even before the Republic was established. So we need to try to figure out those things. I'm hopeful of that, but hope is rooted on action. Hope is rooted on robust legacy. And when there is no legacy, it's time to start one. If you don't have it, for example, on artificial intelligence. I was with Claudia when she did the experiment, and you put in the engine to try to what now is so fashionable, to generate an image out of X information. But if you don't have information, you're not going to generate anything. It's very biased. So does that mean that people from Costa Rica or other places, are we out of that world that's to come? So that's why we also need to build those legacies for the future, to be part of that world in an equitable way, not on an undignifying way. I think in that direction are the challenges we're facing.
Thank you for your answer. Well, now it's time to open the floor to you, our audience. It's in the end, after the Q&A. Yes, thank you. So open the floor to you here and online. Well, to ensure that we can have as many questions as possible, I would like you to keep your questions brief and direct them to a specific panelist, okay? And I also encourage our panelists to keep your answers concise as well. This will allow us to hear from more of you. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. I have a question here from Juanma.
So my name is Manuel Castro, a postdoc here at Harvard. I guess I should direct my question to someone, so for a little Ronaldo to just spoke about this, but whoever wants to chime in, it's great. For me, I agree with you that Costa Rica lives in a dual economy, right? With a sector that is fully plugged in to the global economy, which is dynamic, right? Which is growing, which, combines with a sector that is, very stagnant, local firms that are not very productive. And I was wondering, how would you perceive that, the Costa Rican society or the Costa Rican government could make this other sector, this very stagnant sector, more dynamic, right? How can we boost our local economy without a zero-sum mentality, right? By which we try to take things away from this sector that is truly dynamic, right? To create a more inclusive economy and society. I guess that's an ill-posed question.
Thank you. You want to take that? Okay.
Should I?
Yes, please.
Anyone who wants to? No, so I think that that's one of the big questions we got I'm with that, with Daniela. Erosion of education generates that big gap between sectors. So you have a very productive sector, bilingual, with technologies, very sophisticated, with capacity to connect globally. But the threshold to getting there mostly is that it's degree. Actually, there's a study in Costa Rica that if you surpass not even high school, but ninth grade, if you surpass ninth grade, your chances of being in poverty are close to zero. The problem is lots of people get lost in that process. And that also has a lot to do with what Daniela said, why people lost interest in education, they need income in the household, so they are forced out of labor force. It's distant, it's foreign, even aggressive, exclusive. So education is a big chunk, or more sophisticated, the building of human capital. And the problem we're facing is if we get it that also in healthcare. Healthcare is now very broad, provided to all. And if we get it to be only exclusive for those who can allow to pay, we'll start to erode again our base of human capital. What's the political problem from my perspective of education? One, investing in education, our tradition says is good, and it has been. But for political terms, it's not attractive. Why? Because to see the fruits of good educational system, you need one generation. I mean, when we started a program to make universal bilingual education, you're going to see the results literally 14 years after. So it's like the decarbonization plan. The decarbonization plan, all its fruits are going to occur if it keeps the trend on 2050. But why you do it? You do it because of the children, because of the next generation. But there's a political perverseness at this. And also, I think we have a very centralized system vis-a-vis other places, which is the community has a bigger say. And I think also there's lots of rent seeking around it. And that makes it very difficult to make more. But that's a big challenge. I think that's something that we need to, if you were to tell me one factor of all of those, well, if you were to ask me 6 years ago, I would say the fiscal factor, because if we were about to default. But now that we're not defaulting, we'll need to touch on education. That's the most critical. Just to say to make you the largest set of workers in Costa Rica is education. It's 90,000 workers of the education system. It's the largest union in Central America. And the second largest group of workers in Central America is the Costa Rican health system, with 60,000 workers. So those are the two muscles. But then you need to make them work. It's not enough just to have them there. So that will be the selection I think we need to choose.
Thank you.
It's a view, not a certain.
Gracias. Por favor.
Hello, ReVista. I had the first time to experience Costa Rica last February, working at an animal sanctuary near Dominical. And it was my first time in Central America. And I learned so much, and I have so many questions buzzing. So I don't know which one to focus on, but I'm also an ideator. So when I come out of the Graduate School of Education, and I run a consultancy, a mission-driven innovation growth strategy consultancy, and I work local to local, as I say. So one thing I kept thinking of partners. What about Berkman Center for for AI? And there just was a program with Africa around developing strategies. And I have somebody I want to introduce you to from MIT that's working in your area. But I kept thinking about in working at an animal sanctuary, there's a huge alumni network of Harvard Animal Health Group. I didn't know about that until I came back. There are hundreds. And even just doing a webinar would provide more information about a strength of Costa Rica. The biodiversity and the ecotourism is such a strength. So lead with strengths, I guess. And I also tied into cybersecurity, and I know that the government had a big attack. And to me, that is a wake-up call for how do you get the next generation? And I'm involved with cyber education and stuff like that. And I just kept asking myself, who are the real champions, there's gotta be some champions to start with who are at a certain level and developing partnerships with universities. How open is the country to develop these kind of real partnerships for capacity building, like Harvard Graduate School of Education or DUS, or which is MIT. So it's a long-winded question, sorry, but I just had a lot of different.
And who would you like to answer that
Anybody
question?
who wants to
I
answer.
want you to choose, please. Thank you. She mentioned AI. Can you
I can,
please?
yes,
Yeah.
I can start, and I think, other, members of the panel can, do whatever I have to say. I am going by parts. First of all, there is, we are trying to organize a group of Latin American students, that are from Harvard and MIT, that are working on AI to understand what are the limitations, how can we help with the resources that we have here in order to not only share knowledge, to translate information, but also to get closer to academic institutions in Latin America. So I found out that there are strong bounds in Mexico, Brazil, but for some reason, it seems like Central America just get lost. And the idea is to try to get closer to academic institutions in specifically Central America that are pretty much completely under the radar, with the institutions and alumni from MIT, from Harvard. So that is an effort that we're trying to do. And to understand what are the limitations that people from Latin America, beyond the very evident ones, right? But what are the limitations that people in Latin America may face that people from Harvard and MIT communities could help them to get closer and even get to these institutions? Sometimes what you need is to understand how to navigate the system. And that is one of the biggest barriers that they may have. I think academic institutions may be open, in my own experience, trying actually to make partnerships from the center that I work with and Latin American and Costa Rican specifically, academic centers. The systems are very different. So our systems are very different. That doesn't mean that we cannot collaborate, but we need to understand, you need to make the bridge on how the public institutions which are the biggest one in Costa Rica, we have our biggest institutions in Costa Rica, academic, are public. And their system is very different from how MIT or Harvard may work. So trying to make that bridge is, it is a work on its own, but I think it's feasible, completely feasible. It just needs the will to do it and the organization around make those alliances. But I think it's completely possible. And
The champions,
yeah.
champions at the macro level, are there?
Danny, you wanted to say something?
Oh, no. Well, sorry. It's very interesting because I'm actually developing, taking this class called Gov 1430, Save the World with Tech. And where my project, I'm building an LLM model trained on, right now it's like legislative projects and laws, but really, I think it's just taking the initiative. No one really is, well, as I've seen, I'm the only Costa Rican female at the college. There's only one other Costa Rican at the college and he's graduating. But I think it's just having people pay more attention to Latin America and actually reaching out. Because when I reach out to universities, like conducting surveys or talking to other students, they're always really open. I feel like especially the University of Costa Rica, I feel like they're really open to work with Harvard. But we need to reach out to Latin America, I feel like, to start doing this. Hopefully this project goes well. This is more like a governmental tool that we're trying to develop, like a demo, to increase civic engagement and get citizens engaged with political information, and also with politicians and, democracy. So, but, you can train models on anything, I feel, so it's a great conversation, but I'm sorry to have interrupted.
So I think you can see that we have the champions.
Thank you. So people online, if you can see a picture that says Q&A. We have the questions online. Thank you. So I'm gonna use one of these and then we can ask for another one in the audience. Parallelly, and this is in Spanish, I'm gonna try to read it. ¿Qué importancia tiene la educación para fomentar una comprensión y apreciación más amplia de la cultura afrocaribeña entre la población costarricense en general? So, what's the importance of education to foster the comprehension and appreciation of the Afro-Caribbean culture among the Costa Rican population in general?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Muchas gracias por esta pregunta, que definitivamente la educación es increíblemente importante. I think I'll continue in English because there's translations, right?
But only online, yeah.
Education and inclusive education is very much needed. I went to private schools in Costa Rica. My brothers and I, in many of these places, we were the only Black children. I did not learn anything positive about myself in schools. And this is something that prevails until this day. We need to, and it doesn't matter where you go. I was actually speaking with a few different people here at Harvard today about these subjects, because I've learned more about, let's say, my lineage or my history in the last few months than I ever did in doing any kind of schooling. And I went to excellent schools, but to find education about ourselves, just for people of African descent as a whole, is very, very difficult. If you travel to Africa, I thought I'd find more information about ourselves there. No, they have the same colonial education. And having to go so far, having to go to Spain, having to come to Harvard just to find out who we are. I mean, that there's obviously a great gap in education and simply the access to it. But education does need to be more inclusive. There is legislature in place that requires it. Again, I'll refer to the ILO's Convention 169. It is a requirement, and but the implementation thereof is lacking.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions from the audience here? Okay, gonna check. Let me choose one of these ones. However, they're not directed to any, but in particular, what role should the government play in promoting and protecting the rights and heritage of its Afro-Caribbean communities? Sorry, that's, I guess, so right. But if you want to jump in also, I would like to know your.
Would be great. You know, I had taken a few notes because I already did, but I do want to thank our President Carlos Alvarado here for signing that verification of self-recognition of the Afro-Costa Rican population as a tribal community, because it binds Costa Rica to, well, not commit this irreparable damage that it will do uprooting our communities. Within our community, we do have different views. You know, the Afro-Tribal Forum, in their different discussions, the Costa Rican one, when we've had these discussions, I mean, there is a great part of our community that says, we just need to be left alone. We were fine before we had this intervention. And everything that has been implemented has been more in a form of assimilation, which, well, we get the short hand of that stick. So that has not been very productive for us. But I have to say that the current administration of Rodrigo Chavez, our current president, is going along to, Costa Rica is formulating the first consultation to the Afro-Tribal communities. This is something historic because we have never been consulted about anything that happens to us or over our territories. Mind you, in Costa Rica, well, it's a Spanish, well, until recently, it was just a Spanish-speaking country. So the laws are in Spanish. You cannot claim ignorance to the laws. But our entire community, we spoke Creole. You know, my father barely spoke Spanish. It's more of my generation where we manage, you know, a few different languages. So even the fact of having laws in a language that's foreign to everyone is incredibly unjust. And but I am glad that the consultation is coming into place, and that is the start. Because once we're part of the conversation, like as far as we all agree as of now, we can answer before anonymously the Afro-tribal communities. We do not agree with being uprooted. You know, we don't appreciate that. But definitely taking these next steps in the free, prior, and informed consultation is a necessary step. Thank you.
Gracias. Time for one more question. Cynthia, you want to take it?
Hi, so, grew up in Asia. My knowledge and a lot of us knowledge about Costa Rica really started from getting to know Rafa. And then,
Our ambassador.
so as I start sharing with my other friends in Asia about Costa Rica, and a lot of people actually giving me some interesting questions, which I want to throw this question to Mr. Carlos. So if you are still running the country, would you consider like foreign direct investment from an individual, as well as like foreign investment from foreign individual to like Costa Rican businesses, government, treasury bond, things along the line? For, you know, there's a lot of country that has those program like second home or residential visa, or, you know, retirement visa by investment. Do you think, what do you think about this sort of scheme? And do you think like attracting foreign direct investor would help Costa Rica for economic development?
So a part of our success in being good at capitalism was actually the ability to attract foreign investment, mostly initially from the United States. Actually, current growth is driven by the nearshoring and the decision from mostly from US to take many of the investments critical from Asia back to the Americas. It's benefiting Costa Rica because we're one of the main hotspots. Actually, Costa Rica is one of the places that produces semiconductors through Intel. So it's also become critical in that geopolitical game. But before that, we became good at receiving investments, also because we have about free trade agreements with 2/3 of the global economy, including China, so that those protect investments, mostly from companies, because also the procurement systems have to be in place, because there's another big phenomena we just discussed briefly here, which is drug trafficking. And drug trafficking, one of its big tools is money laundering. And so that to do that is with individuals has also it requires its procurement. There are procedures for retirement, for people that go to Costa Rica to retire. There's procedure. There are other procedures in place for what's called digital nomads, people that work digitally and want to stay there. So there's a law to specifically address that. And there are trade agreements to securing investments. So that will be the way about it. But it's more in the corporate framework, not necessarily on the individual framework. I've seen some places that actually the individual that shows up with an amount of money and gets some benefits. That's not necessarily the case, but it's also linked with that other circumstance, not only in Costa Rica, in the whole Latin American region that we are experiencing with drug trafficking and organized crime, which is, and that actually it's a big conversation we ought to have, not only as Latin America, but the US, Europe. because most of the consumption of drugs occurs, the big markets of drugs are here in the United States and in Europe. So just to give a sense of that, 1 kilo of Coke in Costa Rica, it's worth about $5,000. But put it in the north of the US, it's about $25,000 cost. And there's a recent study that some people show that those $25,000 can be translated in a container of illegal cigarettes of $1 million. And all that capital goes back to the organized crime. So that's a very sensitive topic. That's why we use more the procurement through corporations with that kind of scheme.
I just wanted to add something very collateral to that point, because I don't know if you noticed that actually Panama has a scheme that it's closer to that, and actually Spain has one. And the Spain government is trying to stop that investment of individual people buying. Yes, they are trying to stop it. And I think to understand why, if you don't have, I believe this could be beneficial if you get through the security filters, so you don't have a different type of problem regarding organized crime. But if you pass laws like that, and Costa Rica has something similar, that is the digital nomads kind of visa. If you have that and you don't have a package of regulations that comes along with that, then you end up mostly in coastal areas. And we are seeing that in Costa Rica, and that's part of the problem that Spain is facing. If you don't get rental control, you will have huge gentrification problems.
We still see it.
We are seeing it in Costa Rica, you are seeing it in Mexico City, and you may be seeing it in other places. So you push local families because of gentrification. If you don't come up, if that comes along with rental controls, urban planning, and other type of land capture value, then you will have a big problem.
Yeah.
Just a collateral.
We can just be like Canada and send all the investors to Quebec, so.
We have time for a last question. So I chose the most provoking one. Sorry, I need to take it from this list. So this la pregunta, to what extent, this is for Daniela too, I chose her. To what extent is the deterioration of quality of education a result of a lack of funding as opposed to a lack of leadership?
I think both, because so the whole issue with the education, I think it's that they're not paying enough attention to the teachers who are crucial. And if the teachers are not well, then the education is just not going to work. And then also leadership is just, we need young leaders. We need someone that can, inspire this young people and give them a voice. And the government, or like the leaders right now in Costa Rica, I don't believe they're doing that, but they should. So I think it would be half and half, because they were also funding the education and like tests or other, like they were spending hundreds of millions of colones in like designing tests. And I'm like, okay, this funds could go to some better area. So I would say both to end on that note.
Thank you, Daniela. And as we conclude, I'm pleased to introduce Carlos Viquez. He is an MPA ID candidate at Harvard Kennedy School, who will provide a summary of today's key points. Carlos also contributed with an insightful article entitled Costa Rica's Path to Success, 5 Key Policies to this issue of ReVista. And Carlos, we look forward for your summary.
Good afternoon. Thank you, June and Dr. Class, for allowing us to share a little bit of Costa Rica. For us, it's really important to share a bit of our country and a little bit of what makes us successful and what are some of the challenges we're facing nowadays. Thank you, Rafa, for hosting this and being an amazing moderator. And thank you to all of our panelists for your wonderful contributions. So I know I'm the only thing in between your dinner. I will be as brief as possible. I know a lot has been discussed, so bear with me for a while. So Carlos Alvarado, our former president, started introducing that to explain why Costa Rica is different, we cannot just name one single event. Just to name a couple of events that made us different, he mentioned in, for example, 1869, our constitution mandated that primary education for both sexes had to be compulsory and free. He also mentioned that in 1882, the death penalty was abolished. In his article, he also mentioned that Maria Emilia Solórzano Alfaro, the wife of the then dictator General Tomás Guardia, was one of the leaders who brought this movement forward. In 1884, San Jose became the first Latin American city with electricity. We basically had 25 lamps, and we have a hydroelectric plant to be able to light those lamps. President Alvarado also mentioned how one of the key factors in our history was not having US military occupation. Unfortunately, other neighbors did have US occupation. For example, just to name a few, there's Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Panama, Honduras. In Guatemala, for example, Jacobo Arbenz was overthrown with the intervention of the CIA in 1954. And apart from history, we also have to name some of our leaders that did a great job. For example, we have Dr. Rafael Ángel Calderón Guardia, who established the University of Costa Rica in 1940, who also created the Costa Rican Social Security Institute, better known as La Caja, in 1941. He also established the social guarantees in 1943 and the labor code in 1943. It's very interesting. He did this with the support of the Catholic Church and the Communist Party. So this is an example of how when you sit at the table and you have frank dialogue, you can come to well-thought policies. We also had Don Figueres, who gained control for a short period after our civil war. And instead of keeping the power to himself, he instead created the Junta of the Second Republic, who created the Supreme Elections Tribunal that ensured later that Costa Rica was going to be a democratic country till today, the 20th strongest democratic nation. It also established the Costa Rican Energy Institute to bring us electricity. This is an institution that is working to this day as well. He nationalized banks, and he granted female suffrage. So thank you, Carlos, for this treasure chest of discoveries.
And abolish the army.
and abolished the army in 1948. Now let's continue with Laylee Brown. I have to say your article was fascinating. The way you wrote it is very passionate. You basically described how the Costa Rican government has not been fair with the Afro-descent tribal communities. Basically, the government has taken away the right of having property titles for a land that they have habitated for the past generations. In your article, you also shared a very interesting story about how you named your son Omi. Omi, basically in Yoruba, means water, and it is a symbol of the trip that her ancestors had to do from Africa to the West Indies to Costa Rica. So it is a symbol of strength and resilience. In her article, she describes that land is way more than an asset. It is the soul of their community, and it is entwined with decades of history, culture, and ancestral wisdom. The Constitution of Costa Rica, with its amendments emphasizing multi-ethnic and pluricultural society, promises equality, property rights, and environmental protection. But the reality that she tells us today is that that is far from the truth in the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. Just to name a couple of communities that have been affected, there's the Barra del Colorado, Tortuguero, Guásimo, Siquirres, Matina, Limón, Cahuita, Puerto Viejo, Manzanillo, and Zigzaola, which are mainly from African descent people. And they have witnessed systemic discrimination in that sense. So we tell to the world a story of Costa Rica as this paradise of peace and environmental protection. What we have to ask ourselves as Costa Rican is if the means justify the ends. For example, by creating national parks and by enacting the maritime zone law, we're depriving Afro-descendant communities of their land. We're pushing them out. And by using a Supreme Court that talks about your community, about the alleged inhabitants in the Caribbean coast, we're dehumanizing your people. And that's something that has to change going forward. Moving on to our former First Lady, Claudia Dobles. She talks about artificial intelligence, and she poses two important questions. The first one is, what will be the future of labor and democracy? And the second one is, how will Costa Rica insert itself into this changing socioeconomic and geopolitical landscape? So very interesting, in 2009, we used to be the second most innovative nation in the OECD, according to the Global Innovation Index. We were the second to Chile. Thanks in grand part to the social reforms and the arrival of Intel in the 90s. But in 2022, we became the seventh Latin American nation in that ranking. So we dropped 5 positions in just 2 years, at the same time that ChatGPT arrived. Perhaps this is not coincidental, and we're not prepared to leverage this success in history. Costa Rica has demonstrated interest in AI. For example, a group of our legislators presented a bill in May 30 of 2023. This was basically to regulate artificial intelligence, and the novelty was that the bill was entirely written in ChatGPT. Although our former First Lady argues that the bill was well-intentioned, it lacked the seriousness that we need to promote frank dialogue in our countries. In the long term, we have to look for more than dialogue. We have to look for better education, like Daniela was telling us today. Apart from developing ICT skills and technical skills, we need to develop empathy, teamwork, and critical thinking. Last but not least, Daniela, representing the youth of Costa Rica in today's panel, tells us about how the high unemployment rate among young adults is damaging our generation. Basically, an article by the University of Costa Rica tells us that 3 out of 10 young people are unemployed today. 1 out of 5 young people neither study nor work. And we have the highest unemployment rates of the OECD with 23%. This was by the end of 2023. Young women in the bracket of 15 to 24 years old have an unemployment rate of 55.4%. And unemployment has profound psychological and social implications. It creates stress, anxiety, and a general sense of hopelessness among the youth. And it is not a coincidence that high youth unemployment is also correlated with low civic engagement. Right now, we have a disengaged community of young people that do not want to vote because they do not feel represented. They do not feel that the status quo is empowering them for the future. Costa Rica has an economy that is reliant on tourism, agriculture, and electronic manufacturing. However, Daniela argues that these 3 spheres do not encompass all of the abilities that the young population have. And she tells us it is not just about creating jobs. It is about creating the right kind of jobs that utilize the talents and aspirations of the country's young population. And with that note, thank you very much for being here.
Like
first of all, thank everyone on the panel, in particular Rafael for his excellent moderation. And Mary, continue the conversation. Gracias por estar aquí. To those of you in Costa Rica and elsewhere online, I wish you could be here to share with us. And thank you for being here. Please for joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.